If you frequently participate in retro game discussion, you may have heard this before. This game aged poorly, that mechanic is outdated, so on and so forth. But what do people actually mean when they say that a game aged poorly? Was it good before and now it's not? Typically, when someone says a game is aged, they're referring to one of these things. The graphics, simplicity, difficulty, controls, inconvenience, or things that were always bad. I'm going to go through all these topics individually and show that, with the right perspective, you can learn to appreciate old school game design. Good design is timeless. Everyone has their own personal preferences, but enthusiasts could benefit from giving more retro games a chance. There's so many excellent games to go back to. Also, with this timeless perspective, people that already like retro games might find an even deeper appreciation for them. Anyway, let's get to the first topic. Graphics. I'm not an expert on art or design, but I know that pleasing aesthetics can exist in different styles. These are different graphical styles. Someone might prefer one or the other, but it's possible to have good-looking visuals in both. It is true that the retro pixelated style came from technological limitations, but it's still a style that can look good. Indie games continue to use it to this day. These older styles used to be cutting edge and impressive. In terms of technology, we've come a long way since the 90s. But technologically impressive and visually appealing are not always the same thing. Majora's Mask looks the same as it always did. The bad parts were always bad, the good parts were always good. It all comes down to the visual design itself, and this is true for every era of gaming. Modern high-definition graphics have their advantages, of course, and they can allow for new possibilities in game design. Are there any advantages to using a retro style? I would say yes. For sprite-based games, the most obvious advantage is clarity and communication. Specifically, what I mean is, all the relevant elements of the gameplay are clear and stand out here. Ultimately, it's up to the developer to get this aspect of the graphical design right, but this is easier to do in a 2D sprite-based game compared to a 3D game or a more complicated 2D art style. Even the early 3D style has its merits. The fog, lighting, textures, and polygon counts all enhance the atmosphere of the game. Indie games still use the low poly style today too, and I think it looks pretty good. It's easier to appreciate older graphics when you think of them as a visual style, rather than just technologically inferior. It's all just different styles that can be done well or poorly. Simplicity. Old games are generally short and with less complicated mechanics. At least when you compare them to modern games. Does being short or simple make a game worse? There are so many classics that people loved before. Are they worse compared to bigger and more complicated games? Just like with graphics, I see simple and complex games as different styles of game design. A short game could have the benefit of being more focused, with good pacing. In other words, short games will ideally have little to no filler. Arcade games are a perfect example of this. These are pretty short games when you compare them to a JRPG. Would Final Fight be improved if it was 5 hours long? Imagine you take Final Fight, add a few hours of easier levels before the real game starts, and maybe some story cutscenes between each level. Theoretically, it could be done well, but it would mess up the focused design of the original Final Fight. So short games have their place, but what about simplicity? Complexity isn't necessarily better than simplicity. Also, some of these retro games appear to be simple on the surface, but actually have some depth to them. Xevious appears to be simple. All you do is shoot and dodge bullets, right? Well, first of all, your movement speed is different depending on the direction you're moving. Holding the fire button makes you shoot at a decent rate, but mashing lets you shoot faster. The higher your score is, the more dangerous encounters you'll get. The bosses have multiple targets on them, so you can play for score and bomb all the targets, or play for survival and just bomb the middle. Oh yeah, there's also bombs. There's targets on the ground you can only hit by dropping bombs. Some of these are moving targets, so you have to time your bomb with their movement path. Some are invisible, but the bomb reticle will light up, and they're worth a lot of points. I could go on. This may be a somewhat simple game, but simple mechanics can be pushed pretty far. Also, any depth this game has comes from the action itself. Other games have exploration and customization, but shmups are typically all action. Having variety in gaming is definitely a good thing. I enjoy JRPGs, shmups, and nearly everything in between. I also enjoy games from every era. All it takes to make me like a particular game is good execution of a fun gameplay concept. Simple games can be fun, and they can be made well. So to me, simplicity itself is not a problem. It's the execution of the game concept itself that matters. Simplicity and shortness aren't bad, and they aren't outdated. There's still a place for these styles of game design. Now when it comes to pricing, this can get a little tricky. Should an hour-long beat-em-up be the same price as an 80-hour RPG like Elden Ring? I don't think so. Not every game needs to be $60 or $70 though. I think this standard pricing actually hurts modern games by adding a lot of bloat and filler just to justify the price. But that's a discussion for another time. Difficulty. A common criticism of old school difficulty is that it's a form of filler. Old school games are short, so they jacked up the difficulty to make them take longer to complete. And some games were actually changed during localization to make them harder. This was done to make people want to buy the games instead of just renting them, and most people will need to spend more than one weekend to get through Ninja Gaiden 3 legitimately. Is punishing difficulty outdated in game design? Picture this. You're at a hard section of a game, there's a gauntlet of traps and enemies between you and the next checkpoint. It wasn't easy, but you made it through the level. Now, there's a boss fight. If you lose, you have to go through that whole level all over again. There's tension, stakes, and excitement. Every mistake hits harder because the punishment for losing is high. Every victory feels more rewarding because it took real skill and strategy to get through the challenge. There's also value in feeling yourself getting better at the game. Developing strategies for hard sections can be fun. Becoming more skilled and playing better is satisfying on its own. Sections that used to be really hard become familiar and manageable. Performing well on a difficult stage has a certain kind of enjoyment that you just can't get in an easy game. The challenging parts of games tend to have more meaningful gameplay than the easy parts. What I mean is, you actually have to play well and make use of the game mechanics to get through the difficult stuff. The easy sections let you get away with sloppy play. Easy stuff can also get boring. The peak of many great games is also the most challenging part. There is a place for easy and chill games, but there's a place for challenge too. Difficulty doesn't necessarily make a game better, but it can add a lot of value. Is high punishing difficulty outdated? No. It's an intentional design choice. Just like anything else, it can be executed well or not. Inconvenience. Something that the vast majority of reviewers see as a positive in modern games is quality of life features, which is another way of saying convenience features. Fast travel, quicker inventory management, and quest markers can be handy, but is there value in inconvenience? Also, remakes and remasters of old games tend to come with new convenience features. This is generally seen as an objective improvement, but is this always the case? One common inconvenient aspect of retro games is cryptic progression. Old games tended to give the player less direct information. Progression in Zelda 1, for example, had to be figured out on your own. There is some guidance, like having some dungeons inaccessible without the items from earlier dungeons, and having hints here and there to help you find some of the hidden dungeons. The game was big for its time, but it isn't so big that someone needed to resort to a guide to finish it. All the hidden hearts are optional and not necessary for completing the game. There's a certain kind of challenge here that goes beyond pure skill and action sections. The player is expected to search for the path forward, and since it isn't explicitly laid out for them, it's very rewarding once you figure it out. Some games can go too far with this, but a smaller retro game with cryptic progression is a valid style with its own merits. Sparse checkpoints are another example of inconvenient design in retro games. This kind of ties in with difficulty, but it's also inconvenient. Like I said before, having few checkpoints that are spread out between challenging segments builds tension and adds stakes to the gameplay. If you die, you have to redo all the stuff you just did. Re-releases of retro games usually come with save states, so you can just breeze through the game without any consequences for bad gameplay. Players are free to play through the games that way, but for any game with good intentional difficulty and design, they'll be missing out on some important aspects of the game. Random encounters have their advantages too. Yep, I'm going to sit here and defend the merits of random encounters. A higher encounter rate can be frustrating, and many old school RPGs have them, but random encounters themselves are not inherently bad. With random encounters, you need to always be prepared for unexpected combat. Also, you don't always know exactly what you'll be fighting in advance, unlike encounters that you can see before you fight them. Random encounters also increase the tension during travel. You can't just see an enemy in advance and walk around it. Just like any other game mechanic, random encounters can be implemented well or not. For an example of really good random encounters, I would point out the old Pokemon games. Specific grass tiles on the overworld have encounters, and when you're in a cave, every tile has encounters. So the different areas have different threat levels. The spaces between towns are less threatening than the actual dungeons. Here's something I won't defend. Password saves. Password saves always sucked, especially the really long passwords. There were some games with special passwords that would produce special effects like the Justin Bailey password in Metroid, but really, this is a form of inconvenience that doesn't add to the game at all. The only benefit I can see in a password save is that you can skip ahead to any point in the game as long as you know the right password. Password saves didn't age poorly though. They were always bad, or inoffensive at best. Too much convenience in modern games can actually become a problem. Yellow paint is an obvious example of this. It sticks out like a sore thumb, and a lot of the time, it's completely unnecessary. Anyone who would have enjoyed the process of figuring out where to go now misses out. It's also a cheap way to guide the player. A better way would be to naturally guide them through the level design itself, but that takes more thought and effort. Really, any form of unavoidable handholding in a game is a problem. Sure, it may help some players get through the game easier, but it undermines the actual design of the game. I think the solution is obvious here. Make the handholding features optional. It's perfectly fine to have easy games and convenience features, but overcoming inconvenience in games is another kind of challenge with its own merits. Not every kind of game will appeal to every kind of player, but enthusiasts will seek out games with novel ideas and challenges to overcome. Controls. The control in Castlevania 1 was designed that way intentionally, and the whole game is designed around the limitations of Simon. The control in this game also matches the level and enemy design. Both of these games are good. You may prefer one or the other. I personally prefer Castlevania 1, but it's good that both games exist. You can play the more methodical game where the main difficulty comes from the combat, or the game with free control where there's more difficult platforming sections. These are both valid styles. As long as the level and enemy design meshes well with the character's moveset, it'll be a solid action game. Controls are only bad when they're at odds with the enemy and level design. Control is just one piece of a larger puzzle. Let me give another example. Compare Castlevania to Mega Man. They're both action platformers, but they're also very different from each other. The way Mega Man controls is complementary to the level design from his games. Putting Mega Man in Castlevania 1 would make the player approach the challenges in that game in a very different way. Learning to master Simon Belmont's controls is just one aspect of the challenge. And it also allows Castlevania games to have different kinds of challenges than the Mega Man games. Having variety within genres and gaming is generally a good thing. See how different styles and different limitations can result in great games? Now, I will say, in certain contexts, limiting the control that a player has can make games worse. Inertia and weight in modern games is a pet peeve of mine. It really comes down to the purpose of the control style. Is the character weighty because it feels realistic and immersive? Or is the weighty movement a key element of the game, with every level and enemy being designed around it? Inertia isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it needs to be implemented correctly. A good example of a modern game doing limited control right is Dark Souls. Your attacks all have windups. Your dodge has end lag. Even your jump arc is fixed, like Castlevania. You can have a wide variety of control styles in games as long as the fundamentals are there. Like I said, good level and enemy design. Can limited control really be outdated? No. Yet again, it's a style. Some games do it good, some games do it bad. If you're feeling up for a challenge, give one of those so-called clunky retro games a chance, and try to judge the controls in context. If the fundamentals are there, good hitboxes, consistency, design that complements your kit, and challenge, it's going to be a good game. Remakes. Real quick, here's my thoughts on remakes. When an old game gets remade, and the remake is good, that makes the original version outdated, right? To some people, yes, the new version will be the preferred way to play. But the existence of a new version doesn't change how good the original was. It's just as good or bad as it always was, so it didn't age. Whether or not you like remakes and reimaginings, they don't affect the quality of the original game. With the right perspective, anyone can learn to appreciate old school game design. There's already a whole lifetime worth of great games out there if people broaden their perspectives. Of course, everyone has their own personal preferences. Some people will always prefer the old school stuff, and others will stick to the newest games. But as for the video game enthusiasts out there, the true gamers, understanding that good game design is timeless will allow you to appreciate more games. Next time you hear a reviewer say that a game has aged poorly, consider whether they're talking about something that was always bad, or a style of design that they simply don't like. Thanks for watching this video. Please hit subscribe if you liked it, because we're going to make some more, and they're going to be good.